So I'm advocating that actually when we're searching in the archives, particularly for women, but that would also apply to other demographics as well, that actually we need to take a patchwork approach because of archival absences. So just the structure of my talk. So I'm going to consider archives and some of the challenges that we have in finding women TV workers in those archives, little bit of existing literature, and then what we can do to find those women, what are the methodologies we can use, what those sources might look like, and then what we can do with them, how can we share these histories, what are the spaces we can do that in. So first of all, archives. We've already had it talked about this morning that actually an archive is not a neutral space. We think of it as a neutral space because it's a place of records, but actually it reflects both the politics and the culture of the organisation that has constituted that archive. And the acquisition strategies are key to that, and they are often opaque, particularly to people outside from those archives. And what are those archives there? They're there to preserve those records, and often preservation is privileged over access. And with some broadcast archives, they privilege commercial and broadcast use over academic visitors, and that is understandable from an economic perspective. So catalogues can be difficult to navigate, and indeed they will reflect industry biases about the hierarchy of power within productions, which may exclude women. So the listings are often in terms of who directed that particular production, maybe who the producer was, maybe who the writer was if it's a drama. But they don't tend to list other roles. So if you're looking for production workers in other areas, those can be very difficult to find. So those archival absences are very telling, and archives privilege the important over the everyday, and frequently women workers are sometimes working on the everyday and therefore are not visible in the archive. We also get this conundrum that women often don't offer up their own work to archives, and I've come across this in my own work. They want those stories preserved, but actually they've probably been told throughout their working lives, oh, what you do isn't very important, what you do anybody could do. So they've learnt to devalue their own contribution and therefore aren't necessarily offering it up. So I've been researching female costume and makeup staff at the BBC. It's much easier, obviously, to investigate BBC staff because of the very extensive archives at Caversham, which unfortunately ITV networks and companies don't have an equivalent. But when I was looking for the women I was researching in the written archives in Caversham, none of these women had archived personal files or personnel files. They would have had them when they worked at the BBC, but they haven't been deemed worthy of keeping for posterity. So they're more difficult to find. And these were women who were heads of department for decades at a time. So they weren't unsubstantial figures at all. So there are issues with the archive and how we navigate the archive. And this is borne out in the literature. So Helen Wheatley, who's just up there, and Rachel Mosley wrote about archiving being a feminist issue back in 2008. We're some time on from there, and it still is a feminist issue. They were talking particularly about the relative absence of texts that were traditionally seen as feminine, so daytime programmes, which I worked on in my broadcasting career, they probably aren't in the archives. Shirley Katz tells us about the methods we need to use to find these women. We need to research round our subject. So we need to find fragments in different places, because the women are there if we look hard enough, but they're there between the gaps almost. So we have to look in these different places to construct as full a picture as possible of the women we're studying. So where can we find these women and fill in some of these archival gaps? So they are visible in some of the documents, the memos, the programme files, the credits. We've heard about the BBC Genome Scheme, which does list some of the credits. If they were listed in the Radio Times, they will be in the Genome Scheme, as long as they weren't a regional broadcast, in which case they won't. So they're in credits, they're in production photos. And they can be found in wider searches. Obviously, talking to living subjects and conducting oral histories, which is something I do a lot, is very valuable and time limited. And also personal collections are an incredibly valuable resource. So I'm advocating that actually we need to take this patchwork approach to archival sources. But what might that look like? So I've been looking at women working in costume and makeup. So one woman that I didn't know about until I talked to another woman who mentioned this figure, Johnny Bradnock. I love the fact that she, I don't know why she's called Johnny, as we'll find out, but she was called Johnny Bradnock. And she joined the BBC in 1937, and she retired in 1964. So it's fairly easy within the BBC written archives to establish those sort of figures. I don't know what she was doing throughout her whole career, but I came across her in memos that talk about her. So in this one here, this is from just after the war. They were looking for somebody to run costume and makeup. They realised with the relaunch of television after the war that they needed somebody to head up costume and makeup. And they decided Miss Bradnock was the woman for that. And I love the fact that you've then got other names scribbled underneath in pencil. So you can see this is a working document. And then there's a memo, and we find out that actually Johnny Bradnock is actually working at Caversham in monitoring. So during the war, she must have been working in the monitoring station there. So we come across her in these memos. We also she's written a couple of these memos herself about overtime for wardrobe dressers. So she's there in some of those records, but actually she's not very visible. There's no documents that are actually about her career. She's there incidentally. So I'll now go on to other documents I've found about her. And I just did a Google search, and BBC yearbooks are a great resource, and they are at Caversham. Ariel, which was the in-house magazine, had a nice article about her in it, which is also online. So things that have been digitised are brilliant as a resource. So she was there in the 1948 BBC yearbook. She was also there in the 1952 television annual, and she's obviously talked about in quite florid terms sometimes. So we get a bit of a sense of her character. So I like this one in the middle. And whose is that elegant figure inspecting newly arrived laundry baskets of Viennese dresses? Would it perhaps be wardrobe and makeup mistress-in-chief Johnny Bradnock's? So you get a real sense of the time, and it's lovely to have a photo of her as well from the 1952 annual. I recorded an oral history with another costume designer, and so she joined the BBC in 1958, and was under the training of Johnny Bradnock at I think it was I think it was at Ealing, but I'm not quite sure. So this is a little snippet of Joyce Hawkins talking about Johnny Bradnock.
It was incredible, absolutely incredible, because I had great confidence in Miss Jan Bradnock, and I came to, I do still revere her memory more than anybody I met at the BBC. She was a woman of great integrity and presence, and she was on my appointments board with Peter Cairns.
And she was called Johnny?
She was called Johnny.
So why was she called Johnny?
I don't know.
Okay, so we get a real sense of who this quite formidable character was. So moving on from Johnny, the costume designer I was interested in was Joyce Hawkins, who joined the BBC in 1958 and retired in 1989. And she has amassed this personal collection. There is very, very little about Joyce in the written archives at Caversham, but Joyce has curated her whole working life. Joyce is now 92. Joyce won't let me film her because she will just about let me record an audio interviews with her, but then she is very picky about the editing. But she has kept everything. So this piece at the beginning here, on the left, that is the actual advert from the newspaper in 1958 that she applied for. We've then got her letter when she's invited to interview, then the letter when she's appointed. You know, she has documented every single thing. She has a whole room in her house, which is, and that's a picture of it up there. She's got a couple of costumes, but she has everything, all the bits of paperwork relating to her career. So she has the order book from 1958 of the costumes, and that's a page from it there. So the top entry is Thora Hird. So Thora Hird, Joyce always worked in Birmingham. So this was when she was at the Gloucester Green studios in Birmingham before BBC Pebble Mill opened in 1971. And they had live dramas going out a couple of times a week, with amazing actors and actresses like Thora Hird, Michael Caine and Judi Dench. So what do we do with these histories? What do we do with these collections? So with Joyce's collection, she wants a home for it. She's 92. She's not going to live forever. Where does it go? I and Sue Maldon have offered it to the BBC, haven't heard back whether they want it. We've offered it to Mace, haven't heard back whether Mace want it. So it risks going to the skip, to the tip. So we need to preserve these things. And I'll try my best to do that. But we can also create our own community archives, and that's something I've done through my BBC Pebble Mill project, which I've been running for the last decade, more than a decade, which is at pebblemill.org. And it's basically a community history and archive that keeps growing. I thought I'd be able to stop it, but I can't, because people just keep sending me more stuff, and I post it up, and then people send more stuff. So there are things we can do ourselves as academics, but also this deserves to be kept somewhere. So if you've got a home for Joyce's archive, I'd be very pleased to hear about it. Thank you. The digital ones it's easier. My husband gets very cross about the amount of stuff that arrives in our house because I can't bear for somebody else to put it on the tip. But to some extent, yeah. I mean, things like the dresses. She took 2 of those costumes when Pebble Mill closed. That she was allowed to take 2 of the costumes. So she took things, and those would be lost. She's got the crown from Penda's Fen. She worked on, she was a costume designer on Penda's Fen. She's got the crown. She made it on her kitchen table. It's got these beer bottle tops as the sparkly bits on it. Those things, they need to be in some exhibition somewhere, because they're brilliant. Well, I mean, history is always selective, isn't it? It's the bits we choose to keep, and we'll forget other bits. In terms of, but as you're making programs, you're not thinking, oh, this is going in the archive. So you've got your program file, you've got your rushes. Actually, I never knew what happened when I was a producer. I didn't know what was selected to go in the archive, if anything. So I don't know that the producers were in control of what went where. Because TV is an ephemeral medium, and you're looking forwards. You're looking to the programme that you're working on that is about to go out. You're not thinking about curating your past.